Hi, this is Walt Kuentzel. I was a counselor at Camp Sequoyah for the final 4 years of its existence from 1975 to 1978. And as a part of the 2025 Camp Sequoyah reunion that was held just recently on June 21st, the reunion planning committee asked me to report on the work that Pete Landry and I have been doing over the past couple of years on a huge archive of papers that document a lot of Camp Sequoyah's history. Fortunately, Grover McNair had the foresight to record my presentation on his cell phone, and this video shows that talk with enhanced PowerPoint slides. So I began the presentation before Grover quite had his phone up and running, but I began the presentation with a little Camp Sequoyah trivia. I asked the group whether anyone knew that Chief once had a co-director through most of the 1930s who actually owned half share of the camp. Surprisingly, nobody in the room of maybe 60 people or so raised their hands. Fred Searle had said he had heard of someone who provided Chief with a loan during the Depression years, but he did not know that there was a co-owner involved. And since no one knew that there was a co-owner, no one knew that person's name, which was Colonel L.L. Rice. Colonel Rice had been a headmaster and co-owner of a military school in Lebanon, Tennessee, and had started a successful girls' camp on the Cumberland Plateau near Crossville, Tennessee. And he signed on as a business partner with Chief Johnson about 5 days after the stock market crash of 1929. But anyway, more about Colonel Rice in a few minutes. I basically want to tell the story about the archives first. My interest in the Sequoyah archives began in 1999 when I attended the first Sequoyah alumni reunion hosted by Kathleen Lauder. And as we all do during these reunions, I found myself wandering through the property, around the property, poking into buildings and so forth around camp. And toward the end of my walking tour, I looked into a storage shed, which was behind the office building, which was called the Houghton Cabin. And inside, I found the place stuffed with boxes of old camp letters, camper files, financial records, and more. It was just amazing. And here's where Grover's video comes in. It was just amazing. And the boxes stacked to the ceiling. Some of them were falling over and scattering across the floor. And I said, yeah, that's a good project to come and clean it up. And I looked at that, and as a sociologist, it was like, gosh, I take some of these mother letters and write some stories about camp experiences and all this kind of thing. And so come back and scan those. So in 2003, I came back. I opened up the door, empty. Completely gone. And so I went up and asked Barry Duran, where is it? And he sort of scratched his head, well, I don't know. And all that stuff, you don't know what happened with it? And he said, yeah, maybe one of the film crew threw it out or something like that. And so I left thinking that, that's lost to history. There's just no more possibility. And it looked incredible, the amount of information that was there. Well, I was telling this story last reunion in 2023 to Pete Landry, and Pete said, well, come here, let me show you something. And so we just walked up the hill, 100 feet to 150 feet or something. There's an old storage shed just behind the two-story bunkhouse there that's still up there. Actually, this is there too. And he opened up the door, and what did we see? So there it was. They had just moved all those records up the hill and into the storage shed. And, since the 20 years before that I had seen it, this place had gone to hell. And, scattered across the floor, boxes, giving out, breaking. It was a mouse condominium throughout there. The mice peed over everything and had nests everywhere. And, stuff was crumpled up and chewed on. And it was sort of nasty to look at and disgusting. I don't know, there are a few of you that saw that, I think. And so anyway, we went to Klaus and Debbie and said, can we clean that up? Thinking that they might say, that's crazy or something, but they said, oh my God, please, yes, please come do this. And so we started going up there. We went in the first day, worked 8 hours or something, and this is what it looked like after the first day. So we cleaned out a big part in the middle of the floor, still files everywhere around the edge. We went up a second day, you can see the dates there. Cleaned out the back wall. Wow. The third day, cleaned up, on the right wall, still some over there behind me. And then finally, after the fourth day, this is what it looked like. And so we had it fully cleaned out and moved over to the junior camp kitchen over here, which was a dry place. Let me back up and say, David Glasgow, you can see these swords here. I think those might have, where's David? So, okay. I think those might have been swords from your Camelot production when in 1963 or something. Yeah. And so, so we found stuff like that. And anyway, this was what we were working on. And so we moved over to the junior camp kitchen here and unloaded everything and stacked it in there in completely in a mess. We had taken all that stuff on the floor and just tossed them into boxes and said we'll sort it later. And so we got over there and we started to sort. And so we've been sorting and sorting. There's Pete. We first started and got all the financial stuff separated into yearly boxes. And then he's working, I think, on camper files there. And then there's this file after file of correspondences throughout the years that the chief never threw away. And it's an incredible, incredible history record that we find there. This is a little, and so I'm going to open this up. You're welcome to come over and see this now. It's much cleaner now. But those are the financials, and this is stuff I can't figure out how to categorize, and some of the boxes that we had in there. And so we've come a long way as far as that goes. But anyway, it's really tedious work. But what I say here is, why is this so exciting? So one of the things that we found very interesting, we started making jokes about it. When we were over here cleaning stuff out on the floor, we kept running across stationery that said Camp Nakanawa. And I thought, and we both thought, what a funny name. And we ran across so many of them that we started making jokes about it. Anyway, those are that. And so Camp Nakanawa was it is still operating over on the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee, near, can't remember the name. Anyway, over there in Tennessee, near Crossville. And in any case, Camp Nakanawa became a really important part of this story because as we started to unfold this, Chief had a terrible time. He really, really struggled for the first 15 to 20 years keeping this place alive. And it all came to a head, as you can imagine, during the Depression. But in 1929 here, this is 1 week before the crash, he sent out this letter. This is from J.J. Nichols, who was the president of Camp Sequoyah Incorporated. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But he sent out a letter to shareholders of Camp Sequoyah Incorporated that said, while Camp Sequoyah has succeeded admirably as a camp for boys, has won the goodwill of a splendid patronage, and ranks high among the camps of the South, yet the camp has been greatly hampered from the beginning and its growth retarded by a lack of sufficient capital to pay for the necessary buildings and equipment and conduct an adequate promotional campaign each spring. All right, so pretty dire kind of setting the stage here. Went on to say later in the letter, the camp cannot be operated another year without additional capital sufficient to take care of $7,000 in current debt, that is unpaid debts from summers before, for building and equipment and a first mortgage loan of $3,500, which soon will mature and must be paid. Now in 1929 dollars, this 10,500 or so, about $175,000 in today's money that he was behind. And so, he was in a huge hole just as on the eve of the Depression and the stock market crash. And so what did he do? Chief Johnson was a great networker. I mean, he networked with people all the time, and he had met this guy, Colonel J.J. Rice, when he worked for the Nashville YMCA back in 1914 or 1915. Colonel Rice ran a military academy, owned a part share in it, and then also opened the Camp Nakanawa. And at the time, in 1929, he was very successful. He had 350 campers there at Camp Nakanawa. Chief was struggling to make 50 or 60 campers. And they both had this sort of respect for each other. So Chief approached J.J. Rice, Colonel Rice, for some assistance. And so how did this situation, this dire situation of
going belly up in 1930, pretty much. How did this happen? There's a lot of reasons why, but it's just the basic growing pains of a new business was one reason. This is a letter from Western North Carolina Incorporated. Now this, I think, speculating, was probably like a Chamber of Commerce or something in the 1920s in Asheville. You know, you can see there's a Vanderbilt name here on the heading and so forth. But anyway, this Chamber of Commerce group had this camp, summer camp section of the company here, where camp directors could advertise their services. And there was a standards group that would go and visit the camp. So it was actually one of the earlier pre-runners to the American Camping Association, but it was for basically Western North Carolina. And so this is a letter from Joseph Hyde Pratt. Anyone know who he is? So Joseph Hyde Pratt was the originator of the Blue Ridge Parkway idea. And so he came up with the idea, did all the political footwork, and did the engineering drawings, and actually supervised some of the original building of a Peaks-to-Peaks highway. And most of the work he did was starting in Asheville and going up past Mount Mitchell along what became the Blue Ridge Parkway. They ran out of money for that project in the, about the Depression, and the National Park Service came in 1934 and took it over and built the rest of the parkway. But Joseph Hyde Pratt was the originator of the Blue Ridge Parkway. So anyway, here comes a letter signed by Joseph Hyde Pratt telling Chief Johnson they've done their visit after the first season. This is 1924. So they've come out and done their visit, and he writes back and he says, "The survey made this year shows that your fee is lower than the suggested minimum, that there has been no analysis of the drinking water, that the sanitary conveniences do not meet the recommendations, and that the housing accommodations do not provide the recommended floor space per camper." So it's just a ripping review of the camp in its first year, by these people. But anyway, it's nice, it's sort of nicely. It says, "These are deficiencies which would make it impossible for Western North Carolina Incorporated to include your camp in its lists of the coming season." So they weren't going to recommend Sequoyah. And of course, as a first-time director, it's like, oh my God, And anyway, but it goes on to say, "and which we think, therefore, you will want to overcome, as the moral tone and the spirit of your camp is excellent." So this is where he was after his first year. He had just broke his back to get funding to start this. He gets a really bad review by the other camp directors. And what do I do next? Well, I got to upgrade more, and I got to find money. So what did he do? That's the next slide. He puts out this document here that went out in 1924. He incorporated Camp Sequoyah, made it a corporation, and then sent out appeals for stock, selling stock. And so through this stock share, he was able to raise, I think, about $10,000. He had 24 shareholders. A couple of them, like J.J. Nichols, had $1,000 in it. A bunch of others had like $100 or maybe $200 or something. But it's interesting, the mice that made in the middle of it, so you can't see all of it, but there's some really interesting information over here. So this was a hard time. You're starting a new business, you're getting a bad review, you don't have the money, so he goes out and raises some money. It was a hard time. For the first 3 years of camp, he taught history at Asheville High School. So 24, 25, 26, he had that full-time job in Asheville while he was still trying to run a camp. So he's working on his pennies almost, his stock sales, and this pressure for facility upgrades that the review had given him. So really hard time because of these cash flow issues. A second reason, of course, were economic crisis. And it's not just the Depression that was the problem. There was also a recession that occurred in 1927. So what you can see, the first year he had 27 people. He was happy about that. He got it off the ground. The second year, even better. He doubled that. And got to 59 people, past his capacity of 50. 26, pretty good. He met his capacity. 27, even better. Way past the capacity. He had to build cabins to accommodate and increase his capacity to 75. It all looks like it's going in the right direction. He quits his job as a high school teacher and comes out here and works full time, figuring that he's going to have to focus full time. And then what happens? A recession occurs, a sort of pre-depression recession, and the enrollment just plummets. So he's down to 55 one year, 63 the next year, and just coming in, creating all kinds of debt problems that got him there. So anyway, so what did he do? Here's this great communicator. He goes and makes an arrangement with Colonel Rice, right? Colonel Rice of Camp Nakanawa, and first he just asked for help with loans, but Rice writes him back and says, no, let me come in and rearrange your entire economic business structure. And so Rice comes in and says, you need to buy out all your shareholders and sign that stock shares over to me, and in exchange I will do this. I think I have that coming up. Yeah, the next slide. So the next slide. So here, this is the agreement that the two came up with. It was a stock buyback the chief had to do, and he did it over a 5-year period. And the arrangement was that he would sign over half ownership to Colonel Rice. What did Colonel Rice do in exchange? He's basically saved Camp Sequoyah. Colonel Rice would pay the unpaid bills from 1928, which were over $2,000, a lot of money in 1929. He would pay the almost $5,000 in unpaid bills from 1929, and then he would pay the mortgage payment from September to December of 1929. Again, and you're talking $350 a month. So, what else? Provide funding for his spring recruitment trip. So Rice gave him that, and provide funding for facility improvements. And so some of this was loans, some of it was just a grant. But anyway, grade out the athletic field. The athletic field used to be, match the slope of the hillside here, and so they did a lot of work flattening it out, and did that several times. They did lake improvements. He purchased the log cabin of Asatawi somewhere down the road here, brought it up and rebuilt it. It was originally built as a craft shop. He purchased, the second half of the chief's cabin. Originally from 1923, it was just that one part on the right side, and in 1930, actually, he added the other half to the left of it to that. He put in electricity. Had an electric generator just down the slope here next to the spring house, and ran electric lines to the dining room, the office, his house, and I think that was it. So anyway, and then he added a couple of cabins to expand his capacity to 100. And so here's Colonel Rice setting up for really positive kind of things. The only problem was Colonel Rice signed this 5 days or so after the stock market crash. He absolutely took it, invested at a really bad time. What this became, it was kind of interesting to read this too. So with all of this, him buying half share and, the success of Camp Nakanawa, Camp Sequoyah was frequently called a little brother camp to Camp Nakanawa. Anyway, it was the sort of situation that, because of that, it was kind of sometimes a tense relationship between the two in their letters. So, the agreement signed 1 week after the stock market crash. This was a tumultuous time for a lot of reasons. Colonel Rice invested at the worst possible moment of the 20th century. And then in 1930, in spite of all these recruitment efforts, obviously, he could only get his enrollment up to 59, which is nowhere near to the 100 that they needed. Also, in 1930, the banks that he held his mortgage and the bank that was his everyday bank went belly up because of the Depression, and so their access to money and loans just sort of dried up, and so they just couldn't find the money. And so the deficits continued, and Colonel Rice even tried to buy out of sell his half share of stock that fall of 1930 after only 1 year. But because these banks closed, the arrangement all dried up, and so they basically kept pursuing it, and so it took quite a while for that to go on. We can see what I have next. But here's the point: without the support of Colonel Rice, in spite of the tense relationship that they had on and off, Sequoyah would not have lasted through the Great Depression. And so my thing is, when I was here, I had never heard of Colonel Rice. Never heard of Camp Nakanawa, never knew of any of that history. But his role in the continuation of Sequoyah during that time was really dramatic and really important to keeping things alive. And the other thing I'll say too is, Nakanoa is still in existence. They had a 100-year celebration in 1920 or 2020, and they put out this 28-page color brochure about all its accomplishments and leaders and everything else. And when you go through that, not a word about Camp Sequoyah, nothing at all in there. And so neither camp recognizes this arrangement, but it was critical to the success, the eventual success of Chief Johnson's mission and the success of the camp. So
the part of the story that I left out was the ending, unfortunately. I suspect that Colonel Rice early on was skeptical about his ability to make any money off of Camp Sequoyah, and so by 1933, Colonel Rice and Chief Johnson had come up with a 10-year plan for Chief to buy out Colonel Rice's share, and it was something along the lines of a payment of $1,200, $1,400, something like that, per year plus 6% interest. And so over the 10 years, Chief slowly paid them off. Fortunately, in the late 1930s, his enrollment stabilized and he was able to get 125 or more campers pretty much every year through 1940 and the early 40s. He expanded again as he was nearing the end of his arrangement with Colonel Rice. And by 1943 was getting over 200 campers each year. And so finally, after 20 years of really hard work, he was generally operating in the black. Not always, but generally speaking, in the black. And by 1951, he was able to buy Canoe Camp and create a canoe camp out on Lake Aquone, then what is today Lake Nantahala. He was able to open Camp Sally, and by 1957 he was able to build Junior Camp. And so from success in the 40s, being out of debt finally, and success in the 50s, he was able to expand Sequoyah into what most of us knew.